you, colleagues. I'd like to welcome everyone with us today, as well as those listening to us online on the Senate's website, sencanada.ca. We're meeting today to continue our study on the subject matter of those elements contained in Divisions 1, 2, 24, 28, and 29 of Part 5 of Bill C-15, Budget 2025, Implementation Act Number 1. Today we will hear from witnesses specifically on Division 1, which creates the High Speed Rail Network Act. With that, I would like to introduce our first panel from Transport Canada, Vincent Robitaille, Assistant Deputy Minister, Major Projects. Bienvenue, Vincent. From Public Service and Procurement Canada, Linda Jenkin, Director General, National Capital Area Portfolio and Accommodations Management. Welcome, Linda. She's online with us. From Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, Stephanie Johnson, Director General, Strategic Integration. Welcome, Stephanie. And from Alto, Martin Amblou, Président et Chef de la Direction. Our witnesses are accompanied by a number of other officials from each department, as well as officials from the Department of Justice Canada. They are here to assist in answering any technical questions on this division. Should any of these officials be called to the table to answer questions, please state your name and title before you begin speaking. And I welcome all people who are here to support the speakers. Thank you all for joining us today. Witnesses will provide opening remarks of approximately 5 minutes, which will be followed by a question and answer session with senators. I will now invite Mr. Robitaille to give his opening remarks. Mr. Robitaille.
Thank you for the invitation to appear again. So today I will outline the respect 2022. The government assessed various delivery options for what was then known high-frequency rail. This work concluded that a collaborative public-private partnership would deliver the best outcome for Canadians. The analysis
also concluded that Canada needed a dedicated project office to lead the development and implementation of the initiative. In 2022, VIA TGF, now Alto, was created as a wholly owned subsidiary of VIA Rail while operating independently. This structure allows Alto to benefit from the independence and corporate agility necessary to advance the initiative and maintain world-class expertise. The Government of Canada, through the Minister of Transport, remains the owner of the high-speed rail initiative and sets the strategic objectives to be achieved. Transport Canada supports the Minister, in particular by developing legislative and regulatory proposals.
25. Transport Canada and Public Services and Procurement Canada, with the support of Alto, conducted a procurement process. Following the evaluation of the proposal, a consortium named Cadence achieved the highest score and was selected as the private partner for the initiative. The evaluation
of proposals also showed that high-speed rail offered better value for money than the high-frequency rail. And in February 2025, the Prime Minister announced that the initiative would proceed as a high-speed rail project and that co-development would be launched. Co-development is the phase during which the project's design and implementation plans will be developed. This phase includes field studies, impact studies, Indigenous consultation and engagement activities, and the acquisition of the necessary land to prepare for the start of construction. In 2029, once co-development is complete for the first section connecting an initial pair of major cities, the government will make a final investment decision, allowing Alto Cadence to begin the construction phase.
Will be involved during the co-development phase. Allow me to briefly describe the key actors. And I will start with the two departments joining us today. So Public Services and Procurement Canada will provide support for the land acquisition and expropriation process required for the initiative. The Impact Assessment Agency of Canada will lead the impact assessment process as per the Impact Assessment Act. Et d'autres organisations soutiendront également l'initiative.
Other organisations supporting the initiative include Via Rail, providing comprehensive technical advice and expertise to Transport Canada and Alto during co-development. Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada will offer its expertise on community benefits agreements and strategies to increase housing supply near stations. Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada will provide advice on the government's overall approach to fulfil its constitutional obligation to consult with Indigenous peoples. The Canadian Transportation Agency will provide expertise and information on the environmental and technical impacts of railway construction and operation.
The High-Speed Rail Network Act will allow our country to realize the enormous economic benefits associated with this initiative. Thank you for inviting me, and I will be pleased to respond to your questions.
Merci, Mr. Robitaille. I will now invite Ms. Jenkin to give her opening remarks. Ms. Jenkin, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Linda Jenkin, and I am the Director General of the National Capital Area Portfolio and Accommodations Management Sector within the Real Property Services branch at Public Services and Procurement Canada. I want to extend my apologies for being unable to be with you all in person, but I am pleased to be here virtually with my colleagues today to discuss the High-Speed Rail Network Act. This proposed legislation is a key element in enabling the delivery of the high-speed rail project. Le ministre des Services Publics et de l'Approvisionnement détient
PSPC holds all authority to expropriate parcels of land when necessary for federal public works or for other public interests. As the current regime stipulates under the Act, this expropriation regime wasn't designed for such a project of scope. The bill therefore proposes amendments in order to allow for the quick acquisition of the land required in order to implement the rail network in high speed.
PSPC is responsible for conducting the expropriation process under the new regime and supporting Transport Canada in acquiring the necessary lands to deliver this ambitious project on behalf of Canadians. In carrying out this role, we will work closely with Justice Canada to oversee the expropriation process, ensuring transparency, fairness, and full compliance with the dedicated expropriation regime. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to discuss the High-Speed Rail Network Act. We look forward to working with the committee and answering your questions today.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkin. I will now invite Ms. Johnson to give her opening remarks.
Je vous remercie. Merci, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs les sénateurs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senators. Stephanie Johnson, I'm the Director General of the Strategic Integration Section of the Impact Agency of Canada. I'd like to stress that we are gathered on the non-ceded Anishinaabe territory.
Provide information on the Impact Assessment Act and provisions related to the impact assessment process under the High-Speed Rail Network Act. The Impact Assessment Act and regulations establish an efficient, timely process that focuses assessments of projects with the greatest potential for negative impacts in areas of federal jurisdiction, such as impacts on fish and fish habitat, to prevent or mitigate significant adverse effects from those projects. L'Agence d'évaluation d'impact du Canada.
The Impact Assessment Agency of Canada is responsible for implementing the Impact Assessment Act, and its core responsibility is the conduct of high-quality federal assessments of proposed projects. IAAC's role is to facilitate the sustainable development of these projects through an open and transparent process to coordinate Crown consultation and meet the duty to consult, to uphold the federal government's responsibility to mitigate adverse federal effects within federal jurisdiction, and to inform and coordinate federal permits. Through the assessment process, project proponents are able, like Alto, are able to gain social license to facilitate project development.
La loi sur le réseau ferroviaire à grande vitesse comporte deux dispositions liées à la loi d'évaluation sur l'évaluation d'impact. Premièrement, la loi sera mise en œuvre par segment, 3 segments par devise, et chaque segment sera un projet désigné assujetti à la loi sur l'évaluation d'impact. Plus précisément, la loi identifie les grands projets au moyen du règlement sur les activités concrètes ou la liste des projets pour les lignes de chemin de fer. La liste comprend les lignes de transport de marchandises ou les lignes ferroviaires interurbaines qui nécessitent un total de 50 km ou plus de nouvelles emprises. La loi permettrait que chaque segment soit évalué en vertu de la loi sur l'évaluation d'impact, que le segment nécessite ou non un total de 50 km ou plus d'une nouvelle emprise. Cela donne ainsi une plus grande certitude que chaque segment sera assujetti au même processus d'évaluation. Deuxièmement, la loi sur le réseau ferroviaire à grande vitesse permettrait que l'acquisition de terrain, y compris l'expropriation, puisse avoir lieu avant la réalisation de l'évaluation d'impact.
As the project advances, the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada is ready to support the proponent through the impact assessment process, including coordinating Indigenous consultations to facilitate the identification of key issues for the impact assessment and permitting process. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today, and I'd be happy to take questions related to the Impact Assessment Act. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Lambour, for your opening remarks, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, Honourable Senators. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to appear before the committee to discuss the Alto project.
Since my last visit to a Senate committee. The project is more advanced than it has ever been, and I welcome the opportunity to provide an update and answer your questions. Alto is a high-speed rail project like the ones we see and use in Europe. There's nearly 1,000 kilometers of electric dedicated passenger rail linking Toronto, Peterborough, Ottawa, Montréal, Trois-Rivières, et la Ville de Québec. Fast, frequent, and reliable. It will cut travel times in half, reduce congestion, and strengthen economic prosperity. Last February, the government announced 3 important decisions. The first one was the selection of the high-speed rail that Mr. Robitaille mentioned, the selection of Cadence, the consortium with strong Canadian roots and international expertise, and the funds for the development and the pre-construction phase. And recently, in September, the government committed to a 4-year construction start and designated the project as a transformative initiative to support that target. In 2025, we have moved from an idea to a real project that is known, required, and desired. And from a small team of dedicated group, we're now close to 500 people at Alto and Cadence. So we've shifted from explaining the why to now presented the how this could be done. Début 26, Alto va lancer un processus de
In
consultation.
early 2026, Alto will launch a 3-month public consultation process combining open houses, virtual sessions, and roundtable discussions. At the same time, consultations already underway with Indigenous communities will continue. The feedback gathered during this consultative process will be used to refine the route and maximise the benefits for communities.
Simply cannot be delivered without the proper framework that provides clarity. Clarity, not only for Alto, but also for the industries, for the stakeholders, for the Indigenous communities. Predictability is the name of the game. The measures proposed by the government are, in that regard, critical for Alto. But however, we recognize that these measures come with responsibilities. Limitations imposed on a private property are sensitive, and expropriation is a loaded word. It's not something that we take lightly. Our philosophy, whether in urban or rural areas, will be respect, transparency, and dialogue in all phases of the process. And of course, voluntary agreements will be the preferred approach. That is what I have been doing after 30 years of developing large infrastructure in the country. However, the technical requirements of high-speed rail require some measures. Par exemple, le droit de préemption va nous permettre de prévenir...
The right of preemption will help prevent land speculation. The provision prohibiting certain types of work is intended to prevent non-essential work from artificially increasing the value of land that may be required. The bill is therefore necessary, and some measures will be necessary for Alto to take. But the tools that we're requiring to won't be useful immediately, but at least they'll be well known to ensure visibility. 2 final points.
Shared with us. Indigenous knowledge is central to the project, and we are engaging with 40 Indigenous groups. some who are directly involved in our fieldwork, traditional land use studies, and also Indigenous knowledge studies. So this amendment recognized their important contribution. And finally, the bill also ensures that our partner will operate in both languages. C'est une évidence pour nous. En fait, on en fait une fierté.
Of course, that's obvious. We're very proud of this.
In both provinces, and we have a completely bilingual executive team. Merci de votre attention. Il me fera plaisir de répondre à toutes vos
Thank you for your
questions.
attention. I'd be pleased to respond to your questions. Thank you, Mr. Ambour. We'll now move on to Senators' questions.
We'll have approximately 5 minutes each for the first round. We will have a second round of questions if time permits. Should you wish to ask a question of our witnesses, please alert our clerk, who will add your name to the list of questioners. I invite our Deputy Chair, Senator Dasco, to ask the first question, followed by Senator Lewis. Senator, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, and thank you, Mr. Robitaille, for coming back to speak with us. Many of us appreciated your testimony last week, and I certainly learned a lot. But I want to start with Madame Johnson and a question about environmental impact assessment. I was looking at the McGill report on the rail, and among other things, it suggests that there is relatively low public concern about environmental impacts. So if you take that as a reality, and then with the expedited process, aren't we risking really limiting the environmental impact process when it comes to this rail line? And also, you mentioned that your concern or your activity focuses on areas of impact in federal jurisdiction. So I want to understand what that means for areas that are not in federal jurisdiction in terms of environmental impact: farmlands, communities, habitats, those areas of, potential impact. So please, that's my question. Thank you.
So on the expedited process, so the agency is working to implement efficiency measures to reduce timelines while maintaining rigor and environmental protection and protection of Indigenous rights. And it's doing that for all projects. Right now, it's not just for this one. But we're doing that within the bounds of the Act, the Impact Assessment Act, and we're going to make sure we implement every requirement. So there is a way of doing that without compromising environmental protection. It's about focusing on the key issues. It's about engaging with Indigenous people earlier. It's about really focusing or tailoring the information we might request from the proponent, taking into account what else might be going on. It might be sometimes doing things sequentially in parallel rather than sequentially. So there's a lot that we can do to be more efficient without compromising or environmental protection or Indigenous rights, and always staying within the bounds of what the Act requires us to do. So that's to answer your first question. And on the other, this is a project that is, it's a federal undertaking. So in those cases, we can look at things beyond federal effects, but I couldn't say more. It's a bit outside my area to expand on that at this point. But we obviously will make sure that we look at all impacts that this project might have.
So you would be going beyond areas that are within federal jurisdiction in terms of the impact in areas outside.
I'm hesitant to. Yeah. We'll look at fish and fish habitat, migratory birds, species at risk, impacts on Indigenous people, Indigenous rights. We'll look at issues like noise and vibration from the train and so on and so forth.
How are other impacts supposed to be assessed?
I feel like I can't answer that. I'm sorry. I can come back to the committee with that. But because it is a federal undertaking, my understanding is it would be larger than what we would typically look at and not limited to federal effects.
I guess I'm led to think that those impacts won't be studied.
Well, no, and I'm sorry. I don't want to give that impression at all.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's a little bit beyond what I might be able to explain today.
Mm-hmm. Okay, understood. Do you have any?
40 seconds.
Oh, well, that's. I'll come back later if there's time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Senator Lewis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses. I'm going to ask a legal opinion on a couple of questions here. Usually that costs a lot of money, but that won't have. I guess I won't have to pay anything this morning. Number one, and if you can't answer, if a lawyer can't answer this at this time and want to send in written submission, that'd be great too. But under Clause 4 of the Act, what does declaring high-speed rail network to be works for the general advantage of Canada do? And the second question is, can you confirm that the declaratory power only affects jurisdiction and not spending?
So I'll take this question.
Okay.
So the intent of declaring the project to be of general advantage of Canada is to confirm federal jurisdiction over the project. Because typically, if you have a railway that crosses provincial boundaries, it is considered under federal jurisdictions. But because the project is going to be advanced in segments between major city pairs, there will be segments, for example, between Ottawa and Toronto, as an example, or a segment potentially between Montreal and Quebec City that would be solely located in one provinces. So we cannot have different legislative measure regime apply. So the intent of this provision is to have absolute clarity that the new railway will be under federal jurisdictions, much like what was done with the privatization of the CN, for example, back in the 90s. So that is the intent here. But it's important, provincial laws of general application, like health and safety, all of this will still apply. But it's really, I think, the most specific example, and is one that we're talking about today, it's the impact assessment. So to make sure that there's one impact assessment done and not the equivalent provincial process done at the same time. So there would be one process, and then if provinces are involved, it would be feeding in to the federal impact assessment process. So that's this is the intent here. It does not make it doesn't change the funding model for the project. So what we have is a collaborative public-private partnership. So there's going to be some private investment in the project, and there's also going to be federal funding that will be provided to make the project a reality. So that declaration does not change the funding model here.
Any other question?
Yeah, another question I would have is when we talk about the right of way, and you talked about housing close to the right of way. Will that land for the housing be part of the expropriation process, or will it be after the fact of the railroad's built? Will that land not be expropriated? Then those landowners will have an opportunity to participate in that housing.
So, under the requirement under the Expropriation Act is to expropriation would be used for land required for the project, for the railway. So if there are there will be additional opportunities for housing, but expropriation would not be used for that purpose.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Senator Quinn.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask one of the legal representatives a couple of questions, please. So if there's one of your legal representatives, I'd like to ask them the questions.
Make sure you give us your name, too, when we sit down.
Good morning. My name is Jose Spado. I'm General Counsel at Transport and Infrastructure Legal Services, part of the Department of Justice.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for being here today, and thank you to all our witnesses. So my colleague referred to Section 4 of the declaratory power, and last week TC said that the use of the declaratory power is to clarify that the high-speed rail line will be under federal jurisdiction, even where some segments to be constructed would be within one province. Can you expand on what you mean by clarifying? What's it clarifying?
As Mr. Robitaille was explaining, interprovincial railways are already under the Constitution under federal jurisdiction, but because here the project will be constructed in segments, and if one segment is only in one province, we wanted to clarify and remove any uncertainty and ambiguity that that would not be a federal jurisdiction. So the entire parts of the network as a whole are going to be under federal jurisdiction. So that's what we mean by clarifying.
Okay. And so By clarifying, another way of looking at that would be that you're asking Parliament to unilaterally transfer provincial jurisdiction to the federal government?
Well, the federal jurisdiction would apply to all of the segments, even if one in one province. So our view is that it would be under federal jurisdiction in any way because it's part of that entire network. But if someone would take the position that the segment in one province is under provincial jurisdiction, then it declares that that part is also of federal jurisdiction.
Project, even though it's in two provinces, even though it's in segments, is going to fall under federal jurisdiction.
Yes.
But doesn't 9210A already provide for that?
Well, it provides it when it's inter-provincial. But again, to absolute clarity in confirming it, we are using the declaration to make sure that there's no ambiguity by any party about that.
So for absolute certainty, because of segments of the project,
Yeah.
you're saying 9210A, B is essential. And even though 9210A is there, and it's a railway that goes from one province through to another province.
Exactly, because none of the segment will operate on a silo.
So, okay, so is there also, does that also help with the whole concept of consultations and all the environmental impacts and things of that nature, so that the federal government takes lead for that aspect? Or does each province do its own consultations, its own impacts? Or does the declaratory power cause it to be a single window?
So as Mr. Rutai was explaining, the objective is for the Impact Assessment Act to apply and one environmental assessment for the entire network.
Right.
It will be done, as Mrs. Johnson did mention, in segments. But yes, the federal government will be leading in that process.
Right. So it provides that single window for such a major project. And this is a transportation corridor, I guess one could say.
So the major, you're referring to the major project office?
No, I'm referring to the project being a major project. It's a
Oh,
big
yeah,
project.
yeah, yeah.
Let me
Yeah.
rephrase. It's a big project.
Yes, yes.
Okay. I'm
I
sorry
just
with all
wanted
the
to
confusion, major
clarify.
project office and all that. It's a
Yeah,
big project.
you know,
It's
it's-
interprovincial. It's being done in segments, even though 9210A is there.
Yeah.
For certainty, we're using the declaratory power.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's essential to help facilitate that which the government wants to do.
Yes.
What consultations have taken place? I think I heard you say that that's to come. There may be some that have happened, but for example, is Ontario and Quebec, are they fine with giving up their jurisdiction to the federal government? Are landowners aware, and have they been consulted? Have they been advised of what's going to happen as we go to the right? So how does all that work with respect to getting agreement from folks as you get into this? Has any discussion taken place? And have people said, yeah, this is all good? Have the provincial government said, yes, we'll give up our jurisdiction?
So I think first thing is we have been under active conversation with the provinces for the last 2 years, and actually their participation into the impact assessment process has been
Because of time, I'm going to. I understand you said that last week that there was active discussions on it.
Yeah.
I want to know, have they officially agreed? Have they said, yes, we're on board? Have their legislatures and their assemblies said, yes, unanimous consent? We're with you guys.
Yeah. Well, at this point, the act had not been the high-speed rail network act had not been introduced. So we in respect to Parliament, we did not speak to the details of this act. So we will be engaging them on those details. Yes.
Okay, but I think I'm going to go on round two.
Round two. Senator Meville-Deschamps.
Oui, je voulais continuer sur la même voie.
Thank you very much. I'd like to continue along the same lines, if I may. So I'm trying to understand the relationship between, for example, the Quebec government and its own provincial agency, I guess, and the environmental studies. You said that Quebec might take part in those studies. Is that what you're asserting? If, for example, we realize that there's wetlands, something of environmental importance along a stretch in Quebec, will the federal government take control of all of that, or are you counting on Quebec environmental authorities to take some role? And sorry about focusing in on that, but Well, right off the bat, as I said to the Senator, there'll be a more in-depth discussion with the provinces about this. What the impact assessment regime permits, it permits the participation of various jurisdictions. And the Transportation Agency of Canada is one stakeholder. It also permits for provincial participation for things that are generally under their jurisdiction. But that's already happening or not? Quebec normally likes to go its own way and look after its own matters, doesn't it? Well, I'll defer to Fanny, who'll be able to elaborate on experiences with the provinces. Well, we're at the very start of this project when it comes to the impact assessments. There's the planning stage, then there's the assessment with the proponent and the agency itself. We're at the pre-planning stage, so it's a tad too early to really say how the provinces will be involved, but absolutely we'll be speaking with them. But I can't explain how that will take place as part of this legislation. Well, have the provinces previously been involved in federal rail network like this? Well, we will be working with them, but historically there's never been a project of this scope, so I don't have any examples to offer. Question. If there are 50-kilometre stretches, and I've done the math, that's about 20 impact studies. Perhaps my math isn't good and you'll correct me, but that's a lot of impact assessments. My question is, how are you going to measure the cumulative effects of this high-speed rail network? Microphone, please. So I'll defer to my colleague. We expect a handful of impact assessments, and they'll be long stretches for the most part. And it'll be step by step. The first segment will look at the cumulative effects, and that's a requirement under the Impact Assessment Act. That includes the ramifications of the project and other implications. We know that there are other stretches, other segments. So even if we start with an initial segment, which will be far longer than 50 kilometres, I'm absolutely sure of that, well, we will still consider the project in its entirety. Well, sorry about my mistake, says the Senator, and thank you for clarifying that. Do you have a sense yet of any obstacles that might arise? And I'm thinking of wetlands, for example. They're highly complex. There have been a number of cases in Quebec. Have you already identified what the potential pitfalls might be? Response. I apologise. We're still very early on in the process. We're talking about just starting the impact assessment process. So we don't have enough information to speak with any authority as to what the specific impacts might be. But under a project of this scope, we expect linear effects on fish and the fisheries habitats because there are waterways that will intercept it, and of course there will be potential impact on species at risk and perhaps on Indigenous communities. But again, I can't elaborate yet because it's too soon in the formal assessment process. What about farming lands, says the Senator? Could the interpreter request that one microphone be on at a time, please? Response. It's too soon in the process to be able to speak to the specific impacts that will occur across the whole stretch of the rail network. Well, just to conclude with Mr. Robitaille, you haven't gotten any feedback from the Quebec government, i.e. that the process might present jurisdictional wrangling issues. Response. Well, to date, we've had very fruitful collaboration with Quebec, with Alto, the Government of Canada. So I don't want to put words in their mouth, but our relationship is as healthy as one could hope for.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Robitaille, I'm glad we enjoyed you so much last week. So I have a question for you and Mr. Amblot to start. Years ago, I covered municipal politics for the Edmonton Journal, and I wrote often about the challenges that Edmonton had with its P3 LRT projects. because the city lost control to a certain extent by having a P3, and then when there were deficiencies and delays, the city had very few levers with which to get money back or to incent the company to finish its work to the proper standard. So I wondered if you could explain to us how this P3 is going to work and what guarantees the government has put in place to make sure that the work is finished on time and on schedule, and that if it isn't, are there holdbacks? What are the levers that the government has reserved for itself to ensure that the work gets done and appropriately?
Thanks for the question. We call this a P3, but I prefer the blended finance approach because the asset is really developed by Canada and remains the property of Canada. So, but we need the private sector for their innovation, their way of managing big projects, and to bring their innovation. So we're basically associating ourselves with the private sector, but they don't actually own the asset, different to a P3.
A P3 in the sense that it's conventionally used.
It's really, I prefer the blended because the alignment are a bit more aligned. But we want them to have skin in the game. So the next contractual phase with our private partner, which is Cadence, is going to be to align what should be the price and how do we mitigate the risk and how do we share some pain and gain. So that's going to be the next phase of the contractual negotiation. We're still in the development phase, but the intent is to learn from those experiences here, abroad, in UK and in California to avoid repeating some of the mistakes. And my corporation does not operate anything. I'm there only to manage the projects. So that was the decision of Canada to put that in place a couple of years ago.
Because I think, just as Edmontonians felt pain, I don't know the situation in Ottawa as well, but I think people in Ottawa have some concerns about the way their LRT project has come along for the same sorts of reasons. So there will be mechanisms to ensure on-time performance, not just that the trains run on time, but the trains get done on time.
Construction, the operation, so the incentive are going to be both on the construction, the timing, the budget, and the scope, but also there will be incentive on the operational aspect to align interests as much as possible.
And then I had a question for Ms. Jenkin. When we're talking about expropriation, I think with Monsieur Robitaille last week, we're talking primarily about farmland, because that's where the bulk of the land that you'll be buying will be. But obviously, you're going to need urban stations. And so I wanted to understand if decisions have been made yet about whether the stations will be where current VIA stations are, or if the stations will be brand new, and if so, what kind of urban land assembly are you going to need to be doing for urban stations?
Ms. Jenkins?
Thank you for the question. I think for, and I will default to my colleagues as well at Transport and Alto. Right now, we are in the early stages, as it's mentioned, and so we don't have an approved corridor at this point in terms of the impact and what we're looking at in terms of expropriation. And once we have that, then we will be able to, and we understand what the corridor is, where it's passing through the lands that have to be expropriated. We will ensure that we are taking into consideration any of the urban components and where those stations are and where we can alleviate expropriating lands that aren't necessary. As always with the Expropriation Act and with the new regime that introduces some more streamlined measures, the objective is always to ensure that we are disrupting the least possible and that we're only acquiring what is necessary and can pass through areas where there's existing infrastructure that's there that we can continue to use. But I'll defer to my colleagues for any.
Yeah, and I guess I should ask, once the trains arrive in cities that have existing rail infrastructure, can they go onto conventional track? Or you need to build an entirely, so if you're coming into Toronto where there are GO trains and there's Union Station and there's the train from the airport, do you need a completely separate place or can there share infrastructure at all?
The intent would be to be as independent as possible. So that means running on dedicated tracks, especially in rural areas. In city centers, in Montreal and downtown Toronto, we might need some collaboration by the host railway, including Metrolinx and the others, but the intent is to be as independent, to be as reliable as possible. At this point in time, we're about to present a corridor to the population. A corridor will be fairly large in rural areas and farmers' land, a bit narrower in suburban area, and then might be fairly more specific in city centers because options are less. So that's the phase that we will start sometime in 26 to get the feedback of everyone and then to think about the precise location of the alignment, which will be established later on in 26.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Aucoin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. My first question has to do with what Mr. Amblou just spoke about regarding cities and towns. Now, you're talking about substantial infrastructure in the cities if you want to be independent and have a whole reliable railway network. And that'll mean a lot of collaboration and work with the provinces, cities and towns. What guarantees us that the system will work fluidly and not get bogged down and will start on time, in fact? Response. Thank you for the question. Building linear infrastructure is always a challenge. I've been dealing with this all my life. And in urban centres, there's even greater complexity. We need to minimise any roadblocks that are due to construction, but there are construction and innovation methods, and the CES developed the REM in Montreal, and with limited impacts. And in urban centres, there are underground and above ground options that are available, but the municipalities' collaboration is key. We've already started that collaboration with municipalities, but these authorities are fully fledged partners. They will identify and minimise impacts during the construction phase. Question. Now, if ever for technological or technical reasons the start time were to be delayed, what would be the cost impact were construction not to start on time or as expected? Well, listen, the time frame is directly related to the cost assessment. We believe that with each and every year goes by that we are delayed and the train isn't up and running, it'll cost about $1 billion additional. So we expect to start building in 4 to 5 years' time and to start on time to, in fact, present bang for Canadian taxpayers' buck. That's a huge incentive. And Cadence, which is a private player that we're working with, we're going to ensure that there are the proper terms and conditions in the contract regarding on-time delivery. And there you have it. Question. Earlier we spoke about expropriation. Obviously that's a crucial issue. Have you already held discussions with the cities about that issue? And has the approach been agreed to by the municipalities? Have you made that kind of headway? Response. The consultative process timeline starts in late January, and that's when we're going to present the corridor that I defined earlier. There's obviously a difference between suburban areas, municipalities, rural areas and city areas. And when we become aware of that timeline, we will present that timeline to all elected officials along the corridor, but I haven't had the opportunity to present the consultative process timeline yet. There won't just be one phase of the consultative process, there'll be at least two. We're going to seek opinions, reposition the corridor, tweak it as per their recommendation and objections, and then we're going to present an alignment which is highly defined, and that's when the acquisition process per se will start. Do I have any time left, Mr. Chair? 40 seconds. Well, that's a lot of time. Mr. Robitaille, well, on the matter of expropriation, let's just say, well, perhaps someone can clarify this for me, but what occurs if folks aren't happy with arrangements? I understand that there's an assessment process, there's also the right of preemption, but if there are individuals who find the deal unacceptable, what would be the next step? Well, response. Perhaps I'll defer to Ms. Jenkins on that, but under the Act, there's a process whereby landowners can voice their objections in writing to the minister, and that will be taken into account before the expropriation is completed. Next question.
Arnold.
Senator Arnold.
So, trying to think through this from a political angle, and we talked about the importance of transparency, fairness, openness, clarity. How do we maintain public trust and engagement on a project like this? Monsieur Amblo, I think it was you talked about all the important stakeholders, but you didn't mention the public. So I'm curious, what will the engagement look like on this? Senator O'Quinn referred sort of to NIMBYism and people not wanting this in their backyard. What is the plan? Have you studied other modern democracies that have built structures like this, and what has that looked like?
Thanks for the question. I'm pleased to report that I was able to hire talents from all over the world, including the number one of the high-speed rail in Spain. She has moved over in my team, and she has done thousands of kilometers, and she's bringing great expertise. So she's in my team. Same thing for other people in my team. I've personally done many linear projects, and there's a recipe, and it's about transparency, being out, listening, and adapting. That's the intent. So the first phase of the consultation will be a bit frustration because we will go out and engage on a fairly large corridor, and people will say, well, you don't know exactly where you're going. That is exactly right, because we need to have input from people in Trois-Rivières, in Peterborough. Then we will sit down with the expert and define the alignment, and we will do a second round of consultation on the alignment. Then the very specific landowners who are affected, they will be concerned at that point because a linear project generates social benefit, but it has some private implication. So that's going to be the very sensitive part that will occur later in 26 or 27.
And just a real quick one. I didn't hear anyone mention Windsor today. It's still on the table, correct?
Yes, so the Minister of Transport has asked Alto to study potential options to improve passenger rail services west of Toronto. So right now the project is from Toronto to Quebec City, but in parallel, Alto is working with Cadence to present options and proposals for improvement that would include high-speed rail options to London and Windsor. So based on this information, the government will be equipped to consider the potentials to improve the service, and it's going to be included in the decision making as the project proceeds.
Perfect. Thank you.
Senator Cormier.
Monsieur le Président. Donc, merci d'être là, Monsieur
Thank you,
Lambeau.
Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. And Mr. Lambeau, I'm glad to hear that bilingualism will be part and parcel of this process and the infrastructure planning. You referred to the co-development process. You referred to PSPC, housing, infrastructure, communities, Transportation Canada. All of those departments have responsibilities under the Official Languages Act, and I think that we spoke about that at our last meeting. You need to be able to measure the positive and negative impacts of any decision-making. Now, in the corridor identified, in the particular area identified, there are a lot of official languages communities, minority official languages communities. So here's my specific question. How are you going to measure the impacts? Do you intend to measure the impacts on these communities when it comes to A, expropriation, B, housing, infrastructure, and C and D? In other words, these Francophone communities that fall along that corridor, Toronto, Montreal, will they be affected? But my main question is, do you intend, under the Government of Canada mandate, to measure the impact of the development of the corridor on these official languages minority communities in terms of expropriation and other challenges? I can take that question. Well, at a high level, when you define a corridor and the whole decision-making process, that is reliant on Cadence and Alto's work. It's a multidisciplinary analysis that needs to be conducted, and all the various elements are factored in. So I wouldn't go so far as to say that there is a more specific intentionality vis-a-vis these official languages minority communities. The aim is to choose the best routing, the best compromise, if you will, factoring in all the possible impacts. Question. Well, the reason I'm asking this question is far too often measuring impacts on communities is not factored into projects and plans. You have a fabulous project in the pipeline, but we need to ensure that those communities along the route aren't, in fact, in any way impacted upon in terms of their own development. And I'm just wondering if you intend to do this. Is it a part of the consultative process when it comes to expropriation and so on and so forth? Response. Well, the impact on all communities needs to be measured. And instinctively, I'd say that in fact, it won't be any more difficult to determine the impact on Francophone communities and ensure accountability. I'm sure that most of the impacts will be positive, but if there are negative impacts, we will account for those, and it'll be part of our due diligence in terms of our operations and construction phase. Thank you.
4 minutes left, and I'd like to ask Senator Dasco to ask another question, and if you have time, our other leader, Senator Lewis. So we have about 5 minutes between the two of them.
Thank you. I want to get back to the question about Union Station. So do I understand that that it will or will not go to Union Station? Do you have a preference that it will or will not go into Union Station? Have you made any decisions, or just tell me? I want to...
I have a preference, but I'm not going to share it today.
Oh, darn it. I knew it.
It's still a work in progress. The objective would be to have a station in the vicinity of Union Station. We're studying with Cadence what are the options. We're collaborating with Metrolinx to see what would be the impact. So we're looking at options. It needs to be economical, needs to be reliable. And so we have different options, and we will try to resist committing to only one solution, because that means more speculation, more cost to taxpayers. So we'll keep the options open as long as possible. But the intent in Toronto would be to be in the vicinity of Union if it's feasible and we can make it affordable.
So you're not going out to the suburbs of Toronto to put the station there. I mean, that's not an option.
And this is
wait, hold on. No, not that. I happen to live in downtown Toronto. No, it has nothing to do with it.
The Government of Canada has requested that Alto have stations in downtowns of the city, so including Toronto and Montreal. But at this point, we want to let the experts do their work. We want the consultation to take place before any final decision is made, and this is what Mr. Amblo was referring to. But it's going to be we're not talking about a station that would be very far, in the suburbs or something like that.
Not be using Via Rail lines then, tracks. I mean, is that have you absolutely made that decision? Or... Well,
actually, VIA does not own those rails. Though they rely on the CNCP and Metrolinx, it's one of the issue of their reliability concern in the region. So they don't own the tracks, except between Montreal and Ottawa, where they do own part of the track. It's not the case in the Toronto region.
Okay, so they don't have that track in any case. So you might use that track then?
We'll have options to present at the proper time when we've done sufficient diligent work in consultation. It's too early to be that precise in Toronto.
Do I have any? Okay, I'll leave it for others. Right.
Yes, being from Saskatchewan, I'm glad to hear that there is going to be rail west of Toronto, but yeah, that's another issue. Yeah. But when we talk about this right away, we're in the present now, but of course, with new technology and so on, I mean, existing rail right-of-ways in this country are over a century old. And has there been any thinking or future planning going around the idea of, new technology, twinning of the tracks, perhaps a freight option? Is the right-of-way at this time going to be big enough to accommodate some of the future growth that might happen?
In my previous life, I was in the port business, and I realized that economically, we should never slow down freight trains. So that's why we need passenger trail to get out of the way and not to affect economy. So Alto will need to run on dedicated tracks, and our tracks will basically be incompatible with the freight train, but it will give them more space to run on the CP and the CN because we will not run on those assets. So passenger wins, economy wins.
Saying those, the right of way, have you done any planning to make it large enough to accommodate freight or some kind of freight system? There's a number of freight systems that are being developed, large tubes, all those kind of things, right? That in California, for instance, they're looking at a high-speed freight network.
So the mandate that the government gave to Alto is to build a new passenger rail system. So it does not include, for example, additional expropriation to accommodate freight rail. So, but as Mr. Abdo was saying, by having the new system, being independent, it's going to have a positive impact on the capacity of the CN and the CP network, primarily the CN network, going from west to east.
Just saying, when you're doing this right away, if you make it 75 instead of 50, it probably wouldn't hurt for the future, because 100 years is a long time, or 200 years, this rail line is going to be there for a long time, and who knows what capacity will be necessary in the future.
Thank you, Senator. We have a special request for two senators, Senator Quinn, Senator Miva Deschênes. We have about 5 minutes, so we'll give you each 2 minutes and a half. So I think we should start with Senator Deschênes.
Merci. Une question très technique qui est
Thank you. A very technical question that was asked of me by a number of people talking about this magnificent project. Tractors are going to cut through millions, thousands of layers of soil. Now, they won't be able to pass across the railroads, will they? Because they're electrified. Have you calculated the maximum distance that those tractors and machinery will have to do in terms of detours? And last time I was struck because you said that there needs to be as few as possible interruptions in a high-speed rail network, and that makes sense. So how are you going to factor those delays in? Now, farmers sometimes take an hour and a half to cross from one stretch of land to another, so it strikes me as a tad logistically complicated response. Well, we have to do the groundwork to determine where the tracks will be specifically placed. And obviously, there will be farming land that sometimes will be divided in two. Sometimes we'll have to expropriate or buy the entirety of the land. Sometimes the land is landlocked, and that has to be taken into consideration. So that groundwork has to be done. Now, the fact of the matter is, when it comes to high-speed rail across the world, you can't have tractors or cars that cross the railroads on the ground level. They have to either go underground or above ground, and that is costly. So Alto and Cadence's job is to minimize to the greatest extent possible those scenarios where there would be land that would be, in fact, separated, and lengthy detours would have to be taken. So if necessary, we're going to have to buy residual land in order to avoid those kinds of hiccups. Thank you.
Je voudrais encore une fois m'adresser à la juriste. Alors, voici ma question. Pour revenir à l'expropriation. Bon, nous ne savons pas encore quel sera le tracé, mais pour...
What challenges might we expect to see in this area when they're forbidden to develop the land or build on the land that might be expropriated? Do you expect, there must be some plans to, how do we deal with this? So how do we deal with this?
To the extent that the expropriation is related to the project, the railway project, then it is under federal jurisdiction, and it is possible for the federal government to expropriate for those reasons. And despite the impact that it could have on the individual, and the Act provides for indemnification and compensation to these individuals as a result of that.
Okay, so the declaratory power allows that to occur. Because it's a corridor that's not quite defined as of yet, but there must be a corridor in mind. There's got to be plus or minus 5 kilometers of where you think you may be going, and why have we not given notice that, hey, you may be affected by this? Certainly if you live in different communities and something may happen, you get notice that you may be affected by this, so you can be watching. What happens if some property owner decides to develop their land, build a structure, maybe a new barn for cattle or whatever, and they find out later that, oops, you weren't supposed to do that? Like, how do we deal with that?
In the sequence, Senator, the consultation on the corridor is starting in January, so we're reaching out to a fairly large region of landowners. They will get us that feedback at that point in time, and the alignment will be developed after receiving the initial feedback.
Last quick question. 30 seconds. What's the relationship between VIA and your organization? You're a subsidiary. Who do you report to?
I report to a board of director and a chair of my board. So we're an affiliate of VIA, but independent board member. So I report to the board, who reports to the Minister of Transport. So
VIA is not involved in the equation. So the profits or losses that are all within your corporation, and what do you do for those segments that may operate in a province by itself as you develop the whole thing? You're not waiting for the whole thing to be done. So what happens to those rail routes in Ontario, as an example, that are now high volume moneymakers for VIA, or barely moneymakers, but revenue streams that they're going to lose when a segment comes into operation? What happens to VIA?
So, the mandate that the government has given to both VIA and Alto is for the eventual system to include both the new high-speed rail and the existing services in the communities, including the ones that go all the way to Windsor. So effectively, at the date that will be determined in the future, all of this will be consolidated, because we don't want to have a system that is run by VIA compete against a new high-speed rail system. What we want is to have a comprehensive service offering to the benefits of all people in the area.
Thank you for thinking of Eastern Canada again, i.e. the Maritimes. Thanks.
We've now come to the end of our first panel, and we'd like to thank you all for your contribution today. Very enlightening and packed full of information, and I'm sure we'll have other meetings with you. If there's anything that any of you would like to respond in writing to that was asked in terms of questions, please get in any written responses by December 23rd, 2025. December 23rd, maybe Santa Claus will be with you. Anyway, we'll now suspend until we switch panels and start again. So we would ask the folks to try to move as quickly as possible so we can move forward.